Sometimes the cruelest trap is the one disguised as a favor. Emily Carter had repeated those words to herself since childhood, never imagining they would become the heartbeat of the longest night of her life. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her with a sharp click that echoed through the silent chamber like the final note of a funeral bell. She spun around instinctively, her fingers reaching for the polished brass handle, but it refused to move. Locked. Her breath caught somewhere between confusion and fear as she pressed both hands against the carved wood, calling softly, "Olivia?" Only silence answered. The hallway beyond had already swallowed every footstep. A faint scent of cedarwood drifted through the enormous room, mingling with the warmth of burning candles and the cool fragrance of rain slipping through an open balcony. Emily slowly turned away from the door. The chamber was far grander than anything she had ever imagined. Dark walnut shelves stretched from polished floor to vaulted ceiling, filled with ancient books bound in leather. A massive stone fireplace glowed with quiet amber light, casting long shadows across elegant furniture that looked untouched by time. Moonlight poured through towering windows, silvering the marble floor until it resembled a frozen lake. This was no guest room. Every carefully chosen detail whispered power without demanding attention. Every object carried the quiet certainty of someone who never needed to prove his authority. Her heartbeat quickened. She knew exactly where she was. The private chamber of Alpha King Adrian Blackwood. Panic tightened around her chest. Olivia had smiled only minutes earlier, handing her a silver tray carrying a crystal pitcher of herbal tea and 2 delicate cups. The steward forgot the king's evening service, her sister had said with practiced concern. "Please take this upstairs." "You know I would, but Lady Beatrice asked me to help with the guests." Emily had believed every word. She always believed Olivia. She wanted to believe that kindness still existed somewhere beneath years of disappointment. Now that hope felt painfully naive. She looked down at the untouched tray resting on a nearby table where she had placed it after discovering the locked door. The cups trembled ever so slightly from the shaking in her hands. Outside, distant music from the Moon Festival floated through the castle like a memory too beautiful to belong to her. Laughter drifted upward from the grand ballroom. Somewhere below, nobles danced beneath crystal chandeliers while she stood trapped inside the most forbidden room in the kingdom. A cold realization settled over her. If anyone found her here before she found a way out, no explanation would matter. Rumors always outran truth. She imagined whispers spreading through crowded halls before sunrise. The forgotten Omega had sneaked into the Alpha King's chamber. She wanted attention. She wanted status. She wanted more than her place allowed. The thought alone made her stomach twist. Emily closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each breath the way her late mother had taught her whenever fear threatened to steal her voice. 1, 2, 3. Her pulse gradually steadied, but another sound replaced it. Footsteps. Calm. Unhurried. Deliberate. They approached from somewhere deeper inside the royal suite rather than beyond the locked door. The quiet rhythm echoed across polished stone until it stopped completely. Emily opened her eyes. Across the chamber, just beyond the soft glow of the fireplace, a tall figure emerged from the shadows with the effortless composure of someone entirely at home in silence. His silver-gray eyes lifted to meet hers. Neither surprise nor anger crossed his face. Instead, he simply looked at the frightened young woman standing in his private chamber as though he were searching for an answer no one else had thought to ask. Emily could not force herself to look away from the man standing across the chamber. Every story whispered throughout the Northern Territories painted Alpha King Adrian Blackwood as cold, distant, and impossible to read, yet none of those stories prepared her for the quiet stillness surrounding him. He did not rush toward her. He did not demand an explanation. He simply watched with an expression that revealed nothing except careful attention. The silence stretched until Emily felt every heartbeat echo inside her chest. She lowered her eyes first, afraid that meeting his gaze for too long might be mistaken for disrespect. Her hands folded tightly in front of her as she struggled to steady her breathing. Your Majesty, she said softly, her voice barely louder than the crackling fire beside them. I am deeply sorry. I should not be here. Adrian remained silent for another moment before taking several measured steps closer. His polished black boots barely made a sound across the marble floor. Even then, he stopped several feet away, leaving enough distance that she never felt cornered. You believe you entered this room by choice? He finally asked. His voice was calm, smooth, and unexpectedly gentle, carrying none of the anger she had spent the last several minutes preparing herself to face. Emily quickly shook her head. No, Your Majesty. My sister asked me to deliver evening tea. She told me the royal steward needed help. I opened the door, placed the tray on the table, and before I understood what had happened, someone locked the door from outside. Adrian glanced briefly toward the untouched silver tray before returning his attention to her face. You attempted to leave. It was not a question. Emily nodded. Immediately. The Alpha King walked toward the entrance and examined the heavy lock without speaking. His fingertips brushed lightly across the polished metal before his eyes settled on the keyhole. Emily noticed the smallest change in his expression, not surprise, but recognition. As though the details before him confirmed a thought already forming inside his mind. He turned back toward her. Did you see who locked the door? No, Your Majesty. Did anyone else witness you entering? Emily hesitated. I do not know. The hallway was quiet. A faint sound drifted through the open balcony doors. Music from the Moon Festival had grown louder, followed by distant voices rising together before fading once again into the night air. Emily wished she could disappear into that music, back among ordinary servants arranging flowers or carrying trays through crowded hallways where no one noticed her existence. Instead, she stood inside the most dangerous misunderstanding imaginable. Adrian slowly crossed to the table where the tea still waited untouched. He lifted the crystal pitcher, studying its contents as candlelight shimmered across the clear glass. Then he carefully returned it exactly where it had been without pouring a single drop. Interesting, he murmured almost to himself. Emily looked up uncertainly. Your Majesty? He did not answer immediately. Instead, his attention shifted toward the windows where moonlight spilled across the floor. His silver eyes reflected that pale light with remarkable clarity, making him seem less like the fearsome ruler described in village stories and more like someone carrying the weight of endless responsibilities alone. When he finally spoke again, his words surprised her even more than his silence had. Miss Carter, I do not believe you are lying. Emily stared at him in disbelief. No accusation. No condemnation. Only simple trust offered without hesitation. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps echoed beyond the locked door, followed by anxious voices gathering in the hallway. Someone outside had discovered where she was, and within seconds, the quiet safety inside the chamber began giving way to a storm neither of them had invited. The voices outside multiplied with alarming speed. What had begun as a few hurried footsteps quickly became a restless chorus of whispers, questions, and anxious speculation drifting through the thick oak door. Emily instinctively stepped backward until the edge of the fireplace brushed against her fingertips. Every new voice seemed to strip away another piece of hope she had desperately tried to hold on to. Rumors always moved faster than truth inside the royal castle. By the time facts finally arrived, reputations had already been buried beneath assumptions. She closed her eyes for a brief second, silently praying that someone would simply open the door and allow her to leave before the whispers became accusations. Instead, a firm knock echoed through the chamber. Your Majesty, a deep voice called from the hallway. Lord Theodore requests permission to enter immediately. Adrian did not answer at once. His gaze shifted toward Emily, studying the fear she could no longer hide. Her hands remained clasped tightly together, the knuckles pale from the pressure. She looked less like someone caught committing wrongdoing and more like a frightened young woman waiting for a punishment she could not understand. Another knock followed, louder this time. Your Majesty, the council has gathered. Adrian finally spoke, his voice carrying calm authority that filled every corner of the room without ever rising in volume. "Remain where you are." The words were directed toward Emily, yet they carried no threat. They sounded almost reassuring. He walked to the entrance and unlocked the heavy door himself. The moment it opened, a cluster of noblemen, royal attendants, and palace guards looked inside with unmistakable curiosity. Their eyes immediately found Emily standing near the fireplace. Silence swept through the hallway for only a heartbeat before countless expressions changed at once. Surprise became suspicion. Suspicion quickly transformed into quiet judgment. Emily recognized several familiar faces among the servants farther back in the crowd. Some lowered their eyes in sympathy. Others simply stared, unable to believe what they thought they were seeing. Then another figure stepped forward. Olivia Carter. Her golden gown shimmered beneath the candlelight as though she had rushed directly from the celebration downstairs. She pressed one trembling hand against her chest, her blue eyes already glistening with carefully measured tears. "Emily," she whispered, sounding almost breathless. "There you are. We have been searching everywhere." Emily looked at her sister in complete disbelief. Olivia's expression appeared filled with concern, yet something inside those gentle eyes remained cold and unreadable. "I told you to deliver the tea and return immediately," Olivia continued softly. "When you never came back, I feared something terrible had happened." Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. The simple statement carried dangerous implications without openly accusing anyone. Emily opened her mouth to explain, but the words refused to come. She could not understand how Olivia could stand there pretending to worry after deliberately sending her into this nightmare. Lady Beatrice Hawthorne stepped beside Olivia with a slow shake of her head. "This is most unfortunate," she said quietly, though her voice carried just far enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The Moon Festival welcomes every visiting pack leader tonight. If stories like this begin spreading through the castle, many will question whether proper traditions are still respected." No one directly accused Emily, yet every carefully chosen sentence tightened the invisible circle surrounding her. Adrian remained perfectly still. His expression never changed while one noble after another studied the frightened Omega standing inside his private chamber. Emily lowered her eyes once again, wishing the polished marble floor would simply open beneath her feet. Then Adrian took one calm step forward until he stood between Emily and the growing crowd. His broad shoulders quietly blocked every suspicious stare directed toward her. Without raising his voice, he spoke a single sentence that immediately silenced the entire hallway. Before anyone reaches a conclusion, he said evenly, "I suggest we first discover who locked this door from the outside." Emily felt hundreds of unseen expectations pressing against her shoulders as the royal corridor grew impossibly quiet. Every noble waiting outside seemed to be holding the same breath, eager for someone else to speak first. Instead of looking toward the crowd, she kept her eyes lowered, unable to bear the weight of so many suspicious stares. The polished marble beneath her feet reflected the candlelight in soft golden ribbons, but even that gentle glow could not warm the cold knot tightening inside her chest. She had spent her entire life avoiding attention. She spoke carefully, worked quietly, and accepted every difficult task without complaint because remaining unnoticed was often the safest way to survive. Tonight, fate had placed her at the very center of the kingdom's attention, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear. Slowly, she took one careful step forward until she stood just behind the Alpha King. Her voice trembled despite every effort to steady it. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "Please, if my presence has caused dishonor to your house, I will accept whatever judgment is necessary. I only ask that no one else be blamed because of me." Several nobles exchanged surprised glances. They had expected excuses, tears, or desperate arguments. Instead, the frightened Omega accepted responsibility for a situation she continued insisting she had never intended to create. Olivia lowered her eyes at exactly the right moment, allowing another quiet tear to slide down her cheek. "Emily has always been too trusting," she said gently. "Perhaps she simply became confused." The words sounded sympathetic, yet every sentence quietly strengthened the belief that Emily alone had wandered somewhere she should never have entered. Lady Beatrice released a slow sigh. The kingdom values honesty above all else. Confession often earns more mercy than denial. Emily looked toward her sister for only a brief second. Olivia refused to meet her gaze. That silent refusal hurt more deeply than any accusation spoken aloud. Emily suddenly understood something she had never wanted to believe. Olivia was not trapped inside this misunderstanding with her. Olivia had built it. Even so, Emily could not force herself to expose her own sister before the entire royal court. Their late mother had once held both daughters close and whispered that families should protect one another even when life became difficult. Emily had carried those words in her heart for years. She could not abandon them now, even if she stood alone. She lowered her head once more. "No one forced me," she said quietly. "If punishment is required, let it remain with me." A ripple of murmured approval moved through part of the crowd. To many listening, her statement sounded like an admission rather than an act of sacrifice. Adrian, however, remained completely still. His silver eyes never left Emily's face. He noticed the hesitation before every answer. He noticed the brief glance toward Olivia. More importantly, he noticed that Emily consistently chose words that protected others while placing every burden upon herself. People hiding guilt usually searched for someone else to blame. Emily did the opposite. The Alpha King stepped closer until only a respectful distance remained between them. His voice stayed calm enough that everyone leaned forward to hear it. "Miss Carter," he asked, "if you truly believed yourself responsible, why did your first words inside this chamber apologize for being here rather than apologize for entering?" Emily blinked in surprise. She had forgotten those first frightened moments entirely. Adrian had not. Before she could answer, he continued with quiet certainty. "An innocent person apologizes for the trouble they have caused. A guilty person apologizes for the choice they made. Those are not the same thing." The hallway fell silent once again. For the first time since the door had opened, doubt began shifting away from Emily and toward a far more unsettling possibility. Someone inside the castle had planned every moment of this night with remarkable care. No one spoke after the Alpha King's observation. The silence itself became heavier than any accusation, settling over the hallway until even the distant music from the Moon Festival seemed impossibly far away. Emily remained motionless, uncertain whether hope had just appeared or whether it was simply another illusion destined to disappear. She had learned long ago that a single kind moment could vanish beneath 100 harsh ones. She did not dare trust it yet. Adrian slowly turned away from the gathered nobles and walked back into the chamber. Instead of addressing the council, he examined the room with quiet patience. His eyes moved from the untouched tea service to the open balcony, then toward the polished floor where faint traces of moisture reflected the candlelight. He crouched briefly beside the entrance, studying the narrow strip of marble just inside the doorway. Emily watched in confusion. Everyone else watched in silence. He rose without a word and looked once more at the silver tray resting on the table. The crystal pitcher remained completely full. The 2 porcelain cups had never been moved. Even the folded linen napkin remained perfectly aligned. He lightly touched the side of the pitcher. It was still warm. "Interesting," he murmured again. Lord Theodore frowned. "Your Majesty, surely these details can wait until morning. The guests have already begun asking questions." Adrian met the older noble's eyes. "Truth does not improve by waiting." His calm reply ended any further objection. He turned toward Emily once again. "When your sister handed you this tray, what exactly did she say?" Emily searched her memory carefully. "She told me the royal steward had forgotten your evening tea. She said Lady Beatrice needed her downstairs and asked whether I would deliver it instead. I believed I was helping." "Did you see the steward tonight?" Adrian asked. Emily slowly shook her head. "No, Your Majesty." Adrian looked toward one of the royal attendants standing outside the chamber. summon the chief steward." The young attendant hurried away without hesitation. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Several nobles exchanged uncertain looks, as though the evening had begun drifting somewhere completely different from what they had expected. Olivia folded her hands gracefully before her, maintaining the appearance of patient concern, yet Emily noticed the smallest change. Her sister had stopped crying. The carefully measured tears had vanished the moment the Alpha King began asking specific questions. Emily lowered her gaze again, wondering whether anyone else had noticed. Lady Beatrice stepped forward with a courteous smile. "Your Majesty, perhaps Miss Carter simply misunderstood who prepared the evening service. During festivals, such confusion is understandable." Adrian regarded her politely. "Then verifying the facts should present no difficulty." Lady Beatrice offered no reply. Several minutes later, the chief steward arrived, breathing slightly harder from climbing the grand staircase. He bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, you requested me." Adrian gestured toward the untouched tray. "Did your staff prepare the service?" The steward examined the silver set only briefly before answering with complete confidence. "No, Your Majesty. Your evening tea was cancelled this afternoon at your own instruction because you planned to attend the council gathering after sunset. No tray was assigned to your chambers tonight." Another wave of silence rolled through the corridor. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. If the palace had never prepared the tea, then someone else had assembled it deliberately. Someone had invented an errand that never existed. Adrian's expression remained calm, but his silver eyes grew noticeably sharper. He looked neither surprised nor angry. Instead, he appeared to have reached the first piece of a much larger puzzle. Then he spoke with quiet certainty that carried through the entire hallway. "This was never a misunderstanding. Someone created a reason to bring Miss Carter here. The only question that remains is why." Emily felt the atmosphere change almost instantly. Moments earlier, uncertainty had begun replacing suspicion, but now the discovery that the evening tea had never been scheduled seemed to divide the hallway into two quiet camps. Some faces reflected genuine concern, while others appeared deeply unsettled by where the investigation might lead. No one wanted to be standing too close to a carefully planned deception inside the royal palace. Adrian remained composed, his hands resting loosely behind his back as though every heartbeat in the corridor moved according to a rhythm only he could hear. His calmness unsettled people far more than anger ever could. Lord Theodore cleared his throat, attempting to restore order. "Your Majesty, regardless of how Miss Carter arrived here, the festival continues below. Visiting Alpha leaders are already beginning to ask questions. If this matter is discussed publicly tonight, the reputation of the court may suffer." Several nobles nodded in quiet agreement. Lady Beatrice stepped forward with graceful confidence. "Perhaps it would be wiser to dismiss the servants, escort Miss Carter somewhere private, and resolve everything after sunrise." Emily lowered her head. Part of her desperately wanted to accept that suggestion. She wanted to leave the corridor, hide somewhere no one would look for her, and wake tomorrow believing this entire evening had been nothing more than a terrible dream. Yet another part of her knew that disappearing now would not erase the whispers already spreading through the castle. They would simply continue without her voice ever being heard. Adrian looked toward the gathering crowd without changing his expression. "If I remove Miss Carter before the facts are established," he said evenly, "every rumor will become accepted truth before dawn." No one challenged him. He was right. In every corner of the kingdom, silence often sounded like guilt. Olivia finally stepped forward, her voice soft enough to invite sympathy. "Your Majesty, my sister has always been kind, but she trusts too easily. If someone deceived her, I hope she can be forgiven for her poor judgment." Emily slowly lifted her eyes. Once again, Olivia's words appeared protective while quietly reinforcing the idea that Emily alone had made the mistake. It was the same careful pattern, comforting on the surface, damaging underneath. Adrian noticed it as well. "Lady Olivia," he asked calmly, "when did you last see your sister before she entered this chamber?" Olivia answered without hesitation. "Only a few minutes earlier." I asked whether she would help deliver the tea because I believed the royal steward needed assistance. Believed? Adrian repeated. Yes, Your Majesty. Who informed you that assistance was needed? For the first time that evening, Olivia hesitated. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Emily recognized it immediately. I cannot remember exactly, Olivia replied. The castle was very busy. Someone mentioned it while preparations were underway. Adrian gave a small nod without revealing whether the answer satisfied him. Names have a habit of returning when they become important. The words settled quietly over the corridor. Emily watched her sister's fingers tighten around the edge of her gown before relaxing again almost immediately. It was a tiny movement, easy to overlook, but impossible for Emily to ignore. She had seen Olivia hide nervousness that same way since they were children. At the far end of the hallway, another royal attendant hurried upstairs carrying a folded piece of parchment. He bowed respectfully before offering it to the Alpha King. Adrian unfolded the document and studied it in silence. Then he looked toward the chief steward. This confirms every servant assignment for tonight, he said. Miss Carter's name does not appear anywhere near the royal chambers. A quiet murmur swept through the nobles once again. Emily felt hope flicker inside her for the first time all evening, fragile as a candle in the wind. Someone had erased every ordinary explanation. Piece by piece, the path leading her into this chamber no longer resembled an accident. It resembled a plan designed with remarkable precision, and whoever created it had expected the Alpha King to reach a very different conclusion than the one now unfolding before their eyes. The corridor remained filled with uneasy silence, yet the silence no longer belonged to Emily. It had begun settling over everyone else. The confidence that had filled so many faces only minutes earlier was fading, replaced by cautious uncertainty. Adrian accepted the parchment from the attendant once more, reading every line with patient attention before folding it neatly in half. He handed it back without a single wasted movement. No servant was assigned to this floor after sunset, he said quietly. No delivery was requested. No evening service was scheduled. Therefore someone intentionally created a task that never existed. His words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. Their simplicity carried far greater weight than accusation ever could. Emily remained where she stood, scarcely believing that someone was finally examining the facts instead of judging appearances. She had spent years accepting blame simply because it was easier than defending herself. Tonight, for the first time in her life, someone powerful was asking questions before reaching conclusions. Adrian slowly walked toward the chamber entrance again, stopping just beside the heavy oak door. His fingertips brushed the brass lock before his attention shifted to the narrow stone floor outside. The polished marble reflected dozens of footprints left by servants and nobles throughout the evening, yet one detail seemed to catch his attention. He crouched briefly, studying the faint marks illuminated by candlelight. Lord Theodore looked puzzled. Your Majesty? Adrian pointed calmly toward the floor without touching it. Fresh moisture. Several people leaned forward. A narrow trail of damp footprints led toward the royal chamber, but only in one direction. Emily followed his gaze, confused until Adrian spoke again. Miss Carter entered carrying a full pitcher of warm tea. The base of the silver tray was still damp when she placed it on the table. A small amount of water collected beneath it and transferred onto her shoes. He looked at the marble once more. The footprints continue into this room, but none lead back out. Emily stared at the floor in astonishment. She had never even noticed the faint marks herself. Adrian continued with the same quiet certainty. If she had entered willingly and changed her mind, there would be two trails. One entering. One leaving. Instead, there is only one. She never had the opportunity to walk back toward the door. Another murmur swept through the nobles. Even Lord Theodore remained silent. The explanation was so ordinary that it became impossible to ignore. Adrian turned toward the entrance and examined the lock itself. This mechanism can only be secured from the hallway with a key. He looked at one of the palace guards. Who currently carries keys to this chamber? The guard answered immediately. Your Majesty, only you, the chief steward, and Lady Beatrice received temporary ceremonial access during tonight's festival preparations. Every eye shifted almost instinctively toward Lady Beatrice. She maintained perfect composure, although her smile appeared noticeably tighter than before. Temporary access is common during large celebrations, she replied smoothly. Many preparations required my supervision. I do not dispute that, Adrian answered. I merely establish opportunity. Emily noticed Olivia standing unusually still beside Lady Beatrice. Her sister no longer attempted to comfort her or speak on her behalf. Instead, Olivia seemed far more interested in watching Adrian's investigation unfold, as though silently calculating every new discovery. Emily suddenly remembered something she had dismissed earlier that evening. Just before handing over the silver tray, Olivia had briefly disappeared into an empty side hallway and returned carrying the key herself. At the time, Emily had assumed she was simply unlocking a storage cabinet. Now that memory settled heavily inside her heart. Adrian's silver eyes returned to Emily. Miss Carter, he asked gently, before you reached this floor, did your sister hand you the key personally? Emily swallowed slowly as the forgotten memory became painfully clear. Yes, Your Majesty, she whispered. She did. The quiet confession lingered in the corridor like the first crack spreading across carefully polished glass, and for the first time that evening, Olivia's calm expression faltered just enough for Adrian to notice. Emily's quiet answer settled over the corridor with surprising weight. No one reacted immediately. Even the distant music from the Moon Festival seemed to fade beneath the silence stretching between the gathered nobles. Olivia's expression recovered almost instantly, her gentle smile returning with practiced grace, yet Emily recognized the subtle change in her sister's eyes. For the first time that evening, uncertainty had replaced confidence. Adrian remained perfectly composed. He did not accuse. He did not raise his voice. He simply allowed the silence to linger until it became impossible for anyone to escape the question hanging in the air. Lady Olivia, he said calmly, did you personally unlock the royal corridor for your sister? Olivia lowered her gaze respectfully. Yes, Your Majesty. I believed I was helping the palace staff. Emily has always been eager to assist wherever she is needed. Her answer sounded reasonable. Several nobles nodded faintly, grateful for an explanation that restored order. Emily could have accepted it. She could have remained silent and allowed the evening to end with nothing more than confusion. Instead, another memory surfaced. Olivia had not simply handed her the key. She had insisted that Emily hurry because the Alpha King disliked waiting. That single sentence had pushed her forward before she had time to question anything. Emily looked toward her sister, searching for the warmth she had spent years believing still existed somewhere beneath the polished smile. She found nothing she recognized. Even then, she could not bring herself to expose Olivia completely. Their childhood memories still lingered inside her heart. She remembered rainy afternoons when they had laughed together before grief and ambition slowly changed everything. She remembered promising their mother that they would always remain sisters no matter how difficult life became. Those promises felt painfully heavy now. Adrian noticed the conflict written across Emily's face. He saw the hesitation before every word, the quiet struggle between truth and loyalty. Miss Carter, he said gently, you are under no obligation to protect anyone from this investigation. I am asking only for honesty. Emily drew a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly before becoming still once again. Your Majesty, she answered softly, my sister gave me the key. She told me the steward was waiting. I believed her because I have never had a reason to refuse her requests before tonight. She paused, her voice growing even quieter. But I do not know what she intended. I cannot accuse someone based only on my fears. The hallway became silent again. Emily had offered the truth without judgment. She had described only what she personally knew, refusing to add suspicion where certainty did not exist. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Most people standing under such pressure searched desperately for someone else to blame. Emily continued doing the opposite. Even after every discovery pointed toward betrayal, she refused to speak beyond the facts. That choice revealed more about her character than any speech ever could. Lord Theodore folded his arms thoughtfully. "Your Majesty," he said, "if Miss Carter is withholding accusations despite every opportunity to make them, perhaps we should consider that she values fairness more than advantage." Adrian gave the slightest nod. "That is precisely what I have been observing." Emily looked up in surprise. She had not realized he had been watching more than the evidence scattered throughout the chamber. He had been watching her. Adrian's silver eyes remained calm as he addressed the gathering once more. "Evidence reveals what happened," he said. "Character reveals why testimony deserves trust. Tonight Miss Carter has consistently chosen truth over convenience, even when convenience would have protected her." His words echoed softly through the corridor. For the first time since entering the chamber, Emily no longer felt like the center of suspicion. She felt like the quiet witness to a larger story that had not yet revealed its final chapter, and somewhere within the uneasy crowd, someone understood that the careful plan crafted for this evening was beginning to unravel one honest answer at a time. Adrian allowed the silence to settle one final time before he stepped into the center of the corridor. The candlelight traced quiet lines across the polished marble while every noble, servant, and guard instinctively turned toward him. No one interrupted. No one even shifted their footing. They understood that the Alpha King had reached a conclusion. He looked first at the chamber behind him, then toward the heavy oak door, and finally at the faces gathered before him. "Let us examine only what we know," he said calmly. "No assumptions. No rumors. Only facts." His measured voice carried through the corridor with effortless authority. "First, no evening service was scheduled for my chamber. Second, the tray delivered tonight was prepared outside the official palace assignments. Third, Miss Carter was given access to a corridor she had no reason to enter unless someone instructed her to do so. Fourth, the footprints on the marble prove she entered this room but never had the opportunity to leave before the door was secured from the outside. Finally, this chamber can only be locked from the hallway with an authorized key." Every sentence removed another layer of uncertainty until only the truth remained standing. Emily listened in stunned silence. What had felt like scattered moments of confusion inside her own mind had become a complete picture when placed together by someone willing to see every detail. Adrian slowly turned toward the assembled court. "These facts do not describe an intrusion," he continued. "They describe a carefully arranged deception." A quiet wave of whispers moved through the crowd before disappearing almost as quickly as it had begun. Lord Theodore lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Several visiting nobles exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had nearly witnessed an innocent young woman condemned by appearances alone. Olivia remained remarkably composed, but Emily noticed that her sister no longer looked directly at Adrian. Instead, her gaze rested somewhere near the floor as though avoiding the weight of his calm certainty. Lady Beatrice folded her hands together, her practiced smile growing increasingly restrained. Adrian did not look toward either of them. Instead, he faced the crowd as a whole. "Miss Carter did not enter these chambers seeking privilege," he declared. "She arrived believing she had been entrusted with a simple duty." His silver eyes shifted gently toward Emily. "She apologized before she defended herself. She accepted blame before asking for mercy. She offered facts without accusing anyone beyond what she personally witnessed. Those are not the actions of someone attempting deception." Emily felt her throat tighten. She had spent years believing that honesty alone was too quiet to matter in a world that rewarded louder voices. Yet every small choice she had made throughout the evening had been noticed. Adrian had seen them all. He took one final step forward until he stood between Emily and the gathered nobles once again. "Therefore," he said, his voice unwavering, "I reject the claim that Miss Carter entered my private chamber through her own intention." The words echoed through the silent corridor. She did not trespass. She was brought here. No one spoke. Even the servant standing near the staircase seemed unable to breathe. The accusation that had silently followed Emily since the chamber door first opened disappeared in a single sentence. It did not vanish because someone pitied her. It vanished because the truth had finally been given a voice. Adrian's gaze swept across every face before resting once more on the hallway beyond. The question before this court is no longer whether Miss Carter acted improperly, he said quietly. The question is who believed they could manipulate both her kindness and this kingdom's trust on the same night. As those words settled over the corridor, several expressions subtly changed. Confidence faded. Calm smiles weakened. And for the first time since the Moon Festival had begun, the people who had expected to watch Emily's reputation collapse realized that the investigation had turned in a direction they had never anticipated. No one moved after the Alpha King's declaration. The corridor that had been overflowing with whispers only moments earlier became so quiet that the steady crackle of the fireplace inside the royal chamber sounded almost impossibly loud. Emily remained frozen where she stood, struggling to understand what had just happened. The judgment that had seemed inevitable when the door first opened had completely reversed before her eyes. She had entered the evening believing that truth alone could never stand against influence and appearances. Yet Adrian had allowed neither influence nor appearances to decide what was real. He had insisted that every answer be earned. Lord Theodore slowly exhaled before looking toward the assembled nobles. It appears we have all been far too eager to believe the worst, he admitted quietly. Several council members lowered their heads without responding. Even the servants lining the walls exchanged uneasy glances. Earlier, many of them had pitied Emily in silence while secretly assuming the rumors were true. Now embarrassment settled across the corridor as heavily as suspicion once had. Olivia's graceful posture remained almost flawless, but the warmth she had carefully displayed throughout the evening had disappeared completely. Her smile no longer reached her eyes. Lady Beatrice stepped forward with measured confidence, refusing to surrender the conversation. Your Majesty, she said politely, perhaps the misunderstanding has simply grown larger than it truly is. Festivals create confusion. Servants become distracted. Keys are misplaced. Honest mistakes can resemble careful plans. Adrian regarded her calmly. Honest mistakes do not invent duties that never existed. His reply ended her argument before it had the chance to grow. The older noblewoman hesitated, then quietly stepped back. Emily noticed something unexpected among the servants standing near the staircase. A young maid she recognized from the palace kitchens nervously raised her hand before immediately lowering it again. Adrian noticed the movement. If someone wishes to speak, he said evenly, they may do so without fear. The maid swallowed hard before stepping forward. Your Majesty, she whispered, I do not know whether this matters, but, earlier this evening I saw Lady Olivia speaking with Lady Beatrice in the East Gallery. I was carrying fresh linens, so I kept walking. When I returned a few minutes later, Lady Olivia was holding one of the ceremonial corridor keys. Olivia immediately looked toward the maid with visible surprise. You must be mistaken, she answered gently. The hallways were crowded. The young servant shook her head. I remember because I thought it was unusual. Servants are normally the ones carrying those keys. Another murmur swept through the gathering. Emily closed her eyes briefly. She had not wanted anyone to accuse her sister. Even now, hearing another voice confirm pieces of the evening's events filled her with sadness rather than satisfaction. Adrian watched Emily instead of Olivia. He noticed the grief quietly replacing fear across her face. She was not relieved by the evidence gathering around her. She was mourning what that evidence meant. That single observation told him more than any testimony could. A person seeking revenge would have welcomed every new witness. Emily only seemed to grow quieter with each passing revelation. Adrian finally turned toward the council. The purpose of justice, he said calmly, is not to provide the fastest answer. It is to discover the truthful one. His silver eyes settled briefly on Olivia and Lady Beatrice before returning to the assembled court. Tonight the facts have already accomplished something important. They restored the honor of an innocent woman before the damage became permanent. Emily felt tears gather in her eyes, but she blinked them away before they could fall. She had entered the royal chamber believing she would leave carrying shame that could never be erased. Instead, before the entire court, the burden she had silently accepted all evening had begun lifting away, while the weight of unanswered questions quietly shifted toward those who had believed they would never be asked. Emily stood in complete silence as the last echoes of Adrian's words faded into the vaulted ceiling above. The corridor no longer felt like a courtroom waiting to condemn her. It felt strangely unfamiliar, as though the walls themselves had shifted around a truth no one had expected to uncover. One by one, the lowered eyes around her spoke more clearly than any apology could. The servants who had once watched her with quiet pity now looked at her with genuine respect. Several nobles who had avoided meeting her gaze only moments earlier stepped back without speaking, making room where there had once been judgment. Emily did not know what to do with that kindness. She had spent so many years expecting rejection that acceptance felt almost impossible to recognize. Her fingers remained tightly folded together until she realized they were trembling again. This time, however, it was no longer from fear. It was from relief arriving so suddenly that her heart struggled to keep pace with it. Adrian observed the subtle change without drawing attention to it. He understood that the deepest wounds were rarely visible. Public suspicion left scars that no physician could treat, and restoring someone's reputation required more than simply declaring them innocent. It required giving them back the dignity that had been taken away. Without saying a word, he removed the dark ceremonial cloak resting across his shoulders. The rich fabric reflected the warm candlelight with quiet elegance as he stepped toward Emily. She instinctively looked down, uncertain whether she should move aside, but Adrian stopped directly in front of her. His expression remained composed, carrying neither pity nor dramatic sympathy. There was only calm respect. Gently, he placed the cloak across her shoulders. The unexpected warmth settled around her like protection after a long winter night. Emily looked up in surprise, her blue eyes meeting his silver ones for only a brief moment. "Your Majesty," she whispered, almost unable to find her voice. "I cannot accept something that belongs to you." Adrian offered the smallest hint of a smile. "It belongs exactly where it is needed." No one in the corridor misunderstood the meaning of the gesture. It was not an announcement. It was not a promise. It was something far quieter and, because of that, far more powerful. Before every noble gathered there, the Alpha King chose to restore honor instead of allowing shame to linger. No speech could have carried the same weight. Lord Theodore bowed his head respectfully. One after another, members of the royal council followed his example. Soon the servants did the same. Emily stared in disbelief as the very people she had feared only minutes earlier now acknowledged her with quiet dignity. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The silence itself became the greatest expression of respect. Olivia watched from several steps away, her face perfectly still, yet the confidence that had surrounded her throughout the evening had completely disappeared. Lady Beatrice remained equally silent, understanding that every carefully arranged appearance had collapsed beneath simple truth. Emily lowered her hand to the edge of the cloak resting around her shoulders. The fabric felt surprisingly heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. For the first time since entering the royal chamber, she no longer felt invisible. Adrian looked toward the gathered court one final time before speaking with quiet certainty. No person should lose their good name because others choose convenience over truth. His words settled gently across every heart listening. Emily closed her eyes for a single grateful moment, breathing in the faint scent of cedar carried by the cloak. She had walked into this corridor believing she would leave carrying disgrace that would follow her for the rest of her life. Instead, she stood surrounded by a silence that no longer accused her. It honored her. And somewhere deep within that silence, a new chapter had already begun long before either she or the Alpha King realized how completely this single night would change both of their lives. The castle slowly began to breathe again. Beyond the tall windows, the moon festival continued beneath a sky washed in silver light, and distant music floated across the ancient stone walls as though the kingdom itself had decided to leave the night's sorrow behind. One by one, the gathered nobles respectfully excused themselves, carrying with them a story far different from the one they had expected to witness. They had arrived believing they would remember the evening as a scandal inside the royal chambers. Instead, they departed remembering a lesson about patience, truth, and the danger of judging a heart before hearing its voice. Emily remained standing quietly near the doorway, the Alpha King's cloak still resting across her shoulders. She traced the edge of the dark fabric with careful fingertips, almost afraid it might disappear if she looked away. The warmth it carried was no longer simply protection from the cool evening air. It reminded her that someone had finally believed her before asking her to prove her worth. That feeling was more precious than anything she had ever owned. She turned toward Adrian and lowered her head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said softly. "Not because you defended me, but because you searched for the truth before deciding who I was." Adrian regarded her in thoughtful silence. The castle had seen countless disputes over the years. He had listened to ambitious nobles, clever politicians, and experienced generals, yet very few people understood the difference between winning an argument and honoring the truth. Emily had shown that difference without ever trying to impress anyone. "The truth deserves a patient listener," he answered quietly. Tonight it happened to find one. Emily offered the smallest smile, one that carried relief more than happiness. It was the first genuine smile Adrian had seen from her since she entered his chamber. It transformed her face in a way that surprised him, replacing fear with quiet strength. She was still the same gentle Omega who had walked into the palace believing she belonged in the background, yet something inside her had changed. She had discovered that kindness did not require surrendering dignity. As she prepared to leave, Adrian's voice stopped her once more. "Miss Carter." She turned back. "There is one final matter." Emily waited patiently. Adrian looked toward the now empty corridor before lowering his voice enough that only she could hear. "When this evening began, I believed someone intended only to damage your reputation." His silver eyes rested calmly on hers. "Now I believe that was merely the first step." Emily felt a faint chill despite the warmth of the cloak. "I do not understand." Adrian's expression remained thoughtful. "Neither do I. Not yet." He glanced briefly toward the staircase where the last of the guests had disappeared. "Someone invested remarkable planning into bringing you here. People rarely create such elaborate deception without expecting something greater to follow." Emily searched his face, trying to understand what he had already begun to suspect. Before she could ask another question, Adrian added one final sentence that lingered in the quiet corridor long after the words themselves had faded. "Be careful whom you trust from this night forward, Miss Carter. I have a feeling that whoever tried to place you in my chamber was never truly interested in me." Emily stood motionless as the meaning slowly settled into her heart. She had believed she was the accidental victim of someone else's ambition. Now, for the very first time, another possibility appeared before her. What if she had been the true target all along? As the castle bells rang softly to welcome the midnight hour, Emily stepped into the moonlit hallway carrying more questions than answers, while somewhere beyond the quiet celebration, someone realized with growing alarm that the plan meant to destroy an unnoticed Omega had instead placed her directly in the path of the one man powerful enough to uncover every hidden secret.